field. Oh, it was horrible. It was white out. I barely could make it. The car in front of me ended up stopping, and they weren't going any further. And anyway, I'm glad I made it home. But it was much nicer to drive here tonight. I don't think I'll have any snow going back. Do you think? I think I might be able to make it home. Well, as Mr. Doherty mentioned, my name is Sigrid Bergland, and I am currently at Cornell in the graduate program of Historic Preservation Planning. And I thought I'd start out by giving you a little bit of my personal background so you might understand a little better why I'm interested in historic preservation and why the Catatonk Community Hall really interested me. I grew up with parents I'm from the state of Michigan originally, and my parents bought and remodeled older homes while I was growing up. So I spent a lot of time in real estate offices. I helped my dad do just about everything from shingling to fishing wires through walls. That was exciting. Dad yelling on one end, I can't see it yet, Dad. That was really exciting. So I grew up in houses that were in various states of disrepair and projects going on. So I think that's where my love of architecture stemmed from. And I've always loved history. So when I came across the term historic preservation for the first time when I was in high school, the words literally leapt off the page at me, and I thought, aha, that's what I want to do. I thought that it was a really wonderful way for me to blend the two together and to come out with something that would be practical to use in every day. So I did my undergraduate work at the University of Michigan in art history, and I concentrated on architectural history as much as possible in my art historical studies. There are very, very few historic preservation programs, undergraduate programs in the country. Most of them are graduate programs. So after I was done with my undergraduate degree, I worked for 5 years as a kitchen and bath designer. And I worked in a small enough lumberyard home center that we had to wear a lot of different hats. So I can bid out a pole barn for you if you'd like, or a deck, or a shed. That gave me a really good background in building materials, current building materials and current building and construction methods. And I found that to be invaluable to understand historic building materials and building methods. So I'm really glad that I had that experience. And then I decided I was done with working as a kitchen and bath designer and came up to Ithaca, and I'm now in my second year of graduate school. And over the summer, I was able to work on a couple of fun projects. I worked for the city of Auburn, and I understand that the Historical Society took a trip up there not too long ago, so you're a little bit familiar with the city. What I was working on was a development narrative for the entire city. What developed, when, where, and why. So it's a big undertaking, and I'm actually still working on it as an independent study this fall. And I also worked on figuring out the history of trailer parks in New York State. So you never know where historic preservation will take you. You just never know. That was, you hear that and you think, oh my, that doesn't sound very interesting. It was fascinating. In fact, as I drove into Canada, I thought, aha, there are a couple of old ones, and my eyes just, I'll have to mention them to the professor I was working for. So that's what I worked on over the summer. And right now, I'm taking more classes, and I've started working on my thesis, which is looking at the National Association of Home Builders and their relationship to historic preservation. But what I want to talk to you about this evening is the project that I did for a class I had last semester called Building Materials Conservation. And this is what I ended up producing from that class. It is called a Historic Structures Report. And it's not for the faint of heart to go through it. It's long. Everybody in the class was charged with finding a site to work on a historic structures report for. And I say site because one of my classmates did a bridge. A historic structures report is not only just for buildings, it also can be for other things that you wouldn't necessarily think of as historic or something that you need to do an entire report on. But there are lots of different cultural resources. That's kind of the broader term that you can use to talk about them. And a historic structures report, and you'll hear me call it an HSR, that's the acronym that we use for it, and it saves a little time when you're talking. Preservation has acronyms just like every other field. I could rattle a whole bunch of them off, but I won't. So the HSR consists of three major parts: history, conservation problems, and then preservation solutions. And that's how the tabs in here are broken up. And I thought what I'd do is kind of follow that outline this evening to help you understand, first of all, why those particular parts make up an HSR, and secondly, to give you just a broad overview of what I found during my study of the Catatonk Community Hall. And an HSR is then hopefully used as a planning tool for you as you go forward in figuring out what you're going to do with the building. So the first thing, as I mentioned, is history. And as you can imagine, that just takes a lot of research. And I started out by figuring what the historic context was for the building. What about Catatonk? Why is Catatonk there? How did it develop? And I know this is going to shock you, but there is not a lot written on Catatonk. Poor little Catatonk. It needs, if anybody's interested in doing some research on Catatonk, I'm sure there is so much more out there than I was able to unearth. I just had a limited amount of time. But I was able to piece together just a very general history. As you probably know, Owego was settled in 1784 by James McMaster, and there were settlers in the Candor area by 1793. So I would say that there were houses in Catatonk by 1800 as the development kind of stretched along what was called the Lake Road, that was an Indian trail following 96 and 96B that linked Owego and Ithaca. So Catatonk really started pretty early. Also in 1808, there was a toll road surveyed that followed again the Lake Road. By 1832, that was open to the general public. And in 1831, the Ithaca-Owego Railroad was formed, again to link Owego and Ithaca. And Hollenbeck's mill, Hollenbeck's feed store, the mill building there was, I found records of it back in the 1830s. So again, I think that probably Catatonk was a stop on the railroad from the very beginning. So it had earlier beginnings than you might imagine going through the poor little community now. People say, "Where's Catatonk?" and I tell them, and they say, "Well, I've driven by there. I don't know where it is." you can't blink, I tell them. You just have to watch for the sign very carefully. Again, thinking about why Catatonk didn't develop into a larger town, I think it was probably due to the fact it was close to Owego, and that you can only spread linearly because of the hills that rise up on either side. So I think both of those things probably meant that it was never going to be a thriving metropolis of any size. I think that's what kept it small. I looked and looked and looked, and I still can't tell you what the name Catatonk means. I tried. I couldn't find it anywhere. I did find some interesting spellings, however. My favorite is from an 1836 gazetteer, and it was spelled Catatonk, C-A-T-T-O-T-O-N-G. Then in 1860, another gazetteer calls the, let me make sure I get this right, calls the creek and the community Catatonk, T-U-N-K, but then in the same gazetteer calls the train station Catatonk. So there was some confusion about which spelling people should use. Up till 1893, I found a book called Indian Names in New York that gave what they thought was the Indian word for Catatonk, which doesn't look anything like it to me, but unfortunately didn't have a definition either. And it spelled it Catatonk. But then after that, I never found the spelling Catatonk anywhere. It always was Catatonk. So it went from Catatonk to Catatonk to Catatonk. My guess is probably some European really messed up whatever Indian word was the original word for it, and that's what we have today. By 1887, it was a thriving little community. Another gazetteer describes it as a post village situated on Catatonk Creek, is a station on the Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western Railroad, and contains a depot, post office, church, blacksmith shop, 2 sawmills, and a tannery. So it was, fairly big for that at that point in time. And then, as you may or may not know, in 1895, a pumping station was built in Catatonk, and the highway department now has some of the pumping station buildings, uses those buildings right down the road from the community hall. But what you don't hear in that list is gathering space. They had to travel, the residents of Catatonk had to travel either to Owego or to Candor to be in any type of social activity. Because there was a church, the Union Church was built in Catatonk in 1861, but the Catholic Church wasn't even built until the 1930s. And then there was a little one-room schoolhouse outside of town, but that was pretty much it. So around 1920, the Catatonk Community Club was formed. And there's kind of a fun, probably apocryphal history of the community club that I copied for you. You have a bunch of records from the Catatonk Community Club. And I went through that to find a lot of this information, and I copied the most pertinent information for what I was doing, and that's in the HSR. But this particular history says that the community club first met in the upper story of a building in Catatonk, and it began to shake. So they decided to build something else. They thought something a bit sturdier, a bit lower to the ground might be a good idea. I can't vouch for that, but it's kind of a fun story. Members of the community got together and raised the money. A man named Sidney Toff donated the land and donated time and materials as well. Beyond that, any of the materials were bought or purchased locally for the most part. As an example, a man named Fred Kyle made the concrete blocks for the exterior, and he made them just a little bit down the road. I interviewed Gerald Hollenbeck, who used to own the Hollenbeck feed mill there, and he had some wonderful stories to tell, and I actually transcribed a lot of that interview, and that's in the HSR. But he gave some interesting information about Mr. Kyle's activities, and there was a road that ran up to the top of the hill where he got his gravel, and that's how he would make it. So really interesting. But I think the point to highlight from that is that the community hall, from its very inception and from its building process, was really a community event. A lot of members from the Catatonk region, from Owego, from Candor, gave money, were involved with the whole process. And I handed out to you the opening day article. That took forever to find. I looked and I looked. I thought Candor would have some, the Candor papers would have something. Nothing. The Candor papers had nothing about the opening of the Catatonk Community Hall, just the Owego paper. And it was earlier than I had anticipated. I thought it opened in December, so I was looking through summer. Finally found that article that you see. And it's very interesting for several different reasons. It tells what went on during the opening, and it also talks about the layout of the building, which was really helpful to me as I looked at it and tried to figure out what had happened when. But I hope that you'll have a chance to read through it, because especially a couple of the acts that went on during their show are what we wouldn't call politically correct today. The community hall hosted just a whole variety of different activities through the years, and I'll just name a few for you. The Dairymen's League, Boy Scouts, Home Bureau, 4-H. They had benefit concerts there. The Grange League Federation, wedding receptions, and somebody was just mentioning the dances. Those were incredibly popular, and I ran across a 1957 Candor Courier advertisement, or maybe you found it. I don't remember who ran across it, but there was a 1957 Candor Courier advertisement that I just loved. And I quote, "Dance every Saturday night at the Catatonk Community Hall. Round and square, 9 to 1. This is the best part. Music by Luke Corey and his Roundup Boys. Admission 75 cents. Can't get into a dance anymore. Benefited the building fund. And again, during my interview with Mr. Hollenbeck, he suggested that the dances were stopped because a couple of really nasty brawls broke out. Now, on the other hand, there is some information in the community hall records, especially a newspaper advertisement or a newspaper article that shows a really nasty accident that happened as somebody was pulling out of the parking lot late at night. And as you know, the parking lot there is very small, and so traffic was a big issue. There were so many people that were coming to the dances. So I'm not sure exactly for which reason the dances were stopped, or maybe it was a combination of both. But the dances started right when the community hall opened and went on through the late 1950s, early 1960s. Then the community hall didn't just, and the community club that was based there, didn't just serve as a meeting place for people. It also reached out to the community. Spaghetti dinners, pancake suppers, penny suppers, where every spoonful was a penny. I'd never heard of those before. I thought that sounded like fun. I guess if you didn't eat very much, it'd be a real bargain. There were church services there. It was a polling location for many years. In fact, you have in your possession a couple of the boxes, voting boxes. They had movies and parties for neighborhood children. And the other handout that you have is a letter from a serviceman in Vietnam, who I understand is related to a couple people and was a roommate of someone else, so I had no idea about that connection. But and oh, I forgot to mention, I just understand that the opening date of the Catatonk Community Hall is someone's birthday.
That was the day I was born.
So we have someone who's exactly as old as the Catatonk Community Hall. That's fun. Forgot to mention that. But I really liked that letter from William Paxton. I just thought it was so... Ward? Oh, I'm sorry. All this information going around in my head. I thought it was just really touching what he had to say, and showed that the community hall really did reach out, and was the community club, did really reach out to the members of the community. So unfortunately, the membership began to decline in the late 1970s for a variety of reasons. Society was changing. I think a lot of people were moving away, and as a result, when newer people came in, there just weren't the older residents there to invite them to join. There wasn't as much of a reason. So it dwindled, and the last known activity that I could find that took place there was a Ludwig, one of the Ludwig's daughters' wedding receptions in 1984. And even then, they had to open it up specially for that wedding reception because it had been closed for a while. So it has really stood vacant other than being used for some storage, for over 20 years now. So that was the first stage that I went through, was figuring out the history of Catatonk, to put that building in a context. Why was it built? Why did people care about it? Getting all of that information together. Then the next thing was to figure out the physical history of the building. What had happened to it, when, and again, the why question, which meant I spent a lot of time just kind of staring at the hall in different parts of the hall. I'm sure some people around thought I was absolutely nuts. People driving by just thought, what is this woman doing? Standing out here looking at the grout lines of the concrete block, which I did. I tried to figure out when the different grouting campaigns happened. So I spent a lot of time looking, and of course doing some more research, which that newspaper article helped a lot on. And one thing that you'll notice if you're familiar with the community hall at all, if you look at that picture of the community hall on the original advertisement, the chimney is the biggest change on the exterior. That chimney is no longer, well, the chimneys are there, they were just lopped off. And the reason they were lopped off, the building was originally heated by coal and wood stoves. And in the 50s, they put in a heating system, a new heating system. In fact, there are a whole range of different newspaper articles I found of benefits that they held for the heating system. So they lopped off the chimneys because they did not need them any longer. And on the interior, that was reflected in a dropped ceiling being put in. And a balcony area on the end was closed in at the same time. So a couple of major changes as a result of just a heating system. Think, oh, you put in a heating system, no problem. Well, it caused a lot of changes in the building. A couple more things that you may or may not know. The front entrance was originally the two double doors in the front, again, that you see in that picture. And now the entrance has moved to the side. In the 1970s, they put on the little porch on the side because the road had been widened, and so it was difficult to get in and out of those front doors. And also, they put another heating system in the 1970s, a natural gas system, and they conveniently decided to locate the furnace right in front of the front doors. So you literally can get in that way if you want to. The entrance is turned into a utility room in essence. So again, that's the type of thing that I was looking at, what had happened, when, and why. Let's see, bathrooms were added in the 1960s. Apparently the outhouse was there until the 1960s. I wish we still had it, but we don't. I did some surveying in the town of Athens, Pennsylvania, and I was the only one of my classmates that had an outhouse, so I had the distinction of them. So I like them. Another thing, the shingles on the building were originally wood shingles, and then of course they've been covered by several layers of asphalt shingles. So again, that's covered in a lot more detail in the HSI. That just gives you an idea of what kind of the general history, what the largest changes were that have taken place over the years. So with that history in hand, I then moved on to the second major section, which was figuring out what the conservation problems were. Once I understood kind of the evolution of the building, that could help me understand what was going on inside. And this involved more research and more observation. and research looking at what are called technical preservation services briefs. Those are done by the National Park Service, and there are 42 of them, and I've read them all. They are very helpful, but they are long. You can actually access them on the web through the National Park Service website, and you can look at all of them, and they're very helpful to give you ideas about different topics. For example, they have one on solely wood windows. They have one on terracotta. They have then some more general ones. They have one on barns that actually is not very helpful. I don't know if you've read it. It's so general that it's kind of nebulous, but it covers a lot of different topics. And you'll see that, if you ever happen to read the HSO, you'll see that mentioned quite often, the TPS briefs, different aspects of that, and some other books as well. So using that information, I ranked the problems in the building from most important on down. And I'll just share with you the two big ones, just to give you, again, an example of what you can find in there. First thing are the chimneys, coming back to the 4 chimneys, and secondly, the floor joists. The problem with chimneys, when they lock them off, here's the top of the chimney, and here's the bottom of the roof. So there's a gap. And not only is that just open, so the weather's coming in, one day, as I was in there, and I think you were with me, we opened up the attic doors, and a squirrel ran across. Scared me half to death. So animals are being let in, as well as the elements. So those really need to be closed off in some way, shape, or form. And secondly, the floor joists. When you go inside the building and you walk on the floor, it feels like a trampoline, and then you can jump up. Okay, it's not quite that bad, but it is kind of springy. So I had to figure out, well, okay, I understand that it's springy. There's obviously a problem. I had to figure out, well, first of all, what the problem was and why it was a problem. So Mr. Westgate kindly went down in the crawl space with me, and we found some nice cracking and rotting joists underneath there. It was very pleasant. There are pictures so you can see if you like. And I had to figure out why it was happening. And I found that it was happening for a variety of reasons. There is no ventilation in the crawl space whatsoever. There are no gutters on the roof. So all of the water is dumping right down into the foundation, which is just adding to the problem. Then the ground, quite conveniently, in the back slopes right toward the back of the building, so that adds even more moisture from the runoff. And to top it all off, the joists are too small for the distance they're spanning, so that has helped them crack over the years. So all of those different things are adding up to the fact that the floor joists need to be replaced. That's just, again, a couple of different things, yes.
Do they go from right to left, one joist?
Do they
Or
go-
is it, or,
No, they span about
Yeah.
14 and a half feet, and they're 2 by 8, 16 on center, so they're just a little too small. They should really be either 2 by 10s or bridging the 2 by 8s or doubling them up or something.
There's a beam down the center.
yeah.
There's actually a poured concrete
Yeah.
wall down the center, so
That
they don't
is a big
span.
space for one.
Yeah, the building's about 30 feet wide. I've got some measured drawings in there. The building's about 30 feet wide, so they span a little over
The
14.
floor joists on the left side are worse than.
Yep, on the left side they're worse.
Left side, standing at the road and looking at it.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's where the water is.
That's where the water is too.
But
So-
like you said though, there's no screening, no ventilation, no air in there.
It's a lovely crawl space. All of you should visit. Actually, probably a lot of you wouldn't be able to fit. Mr. Doherty even couldn't fit down in the hole. It's quite small, and we had trouble fitting down there. And then you have to slither on back on your hands. It's really fun. So, not for the faint of heart. I told somebody, I said, oh, I get to go down a crawl space today and look at floor joists. And they looked at me. Hi. Yeah. I guess I get excited about different things. So that was the preservation solutions, conservation problem section, excuse me. So first I did the history of the building, secondly the conservation problems, and then I moved into the third section, which is the preservation solutions. Because only when you figure out what the history is and what the problems are, can you actually begin to think about what the solutions need to be. And that particular section includes 3 different scenarios. 1, mothballing, 2, a mid-range rehabilitation, and 3, a full-scale rehabilitation. And you might ask what mothballing is. It's pretty much like what you do when you stick your clothes in mothballs for the summer. Mothballing is if you don't have the money and the resources or the time or whatever to go ahead and start in a rehabilitation process immediately, you can go ahead and button up the building as tightly as you can to keep out humans and animals and any other unwanted guests, as the case may be, and hopefully keep the building from deteriorating any further. So that particular option is in there as well. And each of those is described in detail and then also priced. And I didn't take it to a contractor and price it, but I give you an idea of what those different solutions are going to cost. So as you go forward, you at least have a ballpark range as you go to an architect, and when he gives you a number, your jaw doesn't drop open and say, oh, I didn't realize it was going to be quite that much.
How long is a roof good for?
What type of roof?
The roof that's on there now.
The roof that's on there
When
right
is it
now?
gonna need to be replaced?
It actually, it's nearing its lifespan right now. It was put on in the 70s by community club members, and it's just an asphalt shingle. So, you know, those are only good 20 to 30
But aren't
years.
they over the top of another layer of asphalt? or-
They're over the top of about 4 layers
That's what I thought.
of asphalt shingles, over the top of the wood shingles.
So
So-
you begin to strain the rafters too.
Well,
It's a
unfortunately,
heavy roof.
yeah, well, not only that, when you look at the building, you can actually see the joists, the rafters outlined when you
That's
look
weird.
on the roof, because the drop ceiling is so heavy on the inside too. It's a lot of lumber that they hung from those rafters, so that really needs to be removed, because that's putting a lot of stress on it too, so that's a good point. Yeah, that's all in there. Each different scenario, as I mentioned, is described, and maybe one of the more important parts of this section in each of those descriptions is a rationale for what should be saved and why. And here I was guided by something called the Secretary of the Interior Standards, and those are used for determining how much integrity, that's the big word to look at when you're talking about historic structure, how much integrity a building has. And the Secretary of the Interior Standards are what any building has to follow if they want federal funding, for example, a rehabilitation tax credit for commercial structures is an example. And the integrity of the building means what defines the building, what gives it its character. And let me give you a couple of examples. The concrete stoop that was added in the 1970s, that does not give it its character. The concrete blocks that were made right down a few miles away in Catatonk, that gives it character. So does the wood floor on the inside, which is the original floor. I mean, it's all tongue and groove. It doesn't even have a subfloor. It's just in wonderful condition, really, for the age of the building and the fact that it has not been perfectly maintained over the years. So that gives it character. The windows give the building a lot of character because there really is no decoration. There's just a plaque over the front door, and that's pretty much it. So the windows punctuating the exterior, that gives it character and integrity. So as I went through to say what you would need to do to rehabilitate the building, I mentioned what's important and why you should keep it. And again, I hope you can understand the different steps that this particular report takes and how that gets you to that point. It's a real flow that takes you from the history to the problems to the solutions to then hopefully actually getting it done. Yes?
The chimneys,
Mm-hmm.
for integrity, they need to be replaced, put back up.
I would say no, actually, because they would be such a hassle to maintain. They are very tall from the picture
Yeah.
compared to the roof. And, I mean, they're gone to match the brick and everything else. I think it would just be, somebody else might disagree with me on that, but looking at it, I would say no. I would say just brick up the chimneys to the point where they are and leave it at that.
It's
That's a
not a
good
good
question.
idea to take down what's left.
Of the building?
No,
Oh, of the chimneys. Okay, I thought of the building? No. Of the chimneys? No, because again, the exterior has so little decoration. The chimneys really do punctuate either side. So I think leaving what remains there, and they're really in fairly decent shape again. But again, that's a good question. And if you took out the chimneys, what would you do with the hole that was left? Because you're not going to be able to match that block very easily. So, but I mean, that's the type of thing that you have to go through and figure out. So that's a good point. Which actually brings me to the question: where do you go from here? How do I hope, and how can you look at this HSR now that you have it? Well, I hope that you can use it, as I mentioned earlier, as a planning tool. And I hope that you go ahead with trying to list it on the National Register or the State Register. You can go ahead and contact the State Historic Preservation Office and start that process in motion. When I was here in February, I remember somebody mentioning a house in Candor that had just been listed. So, it's the same type of process. And that actually leads me to my next point, which is funding sources. Most funding sources are going to require the building to be listed on the state or the National Register. So that really is a first step to going forward to finding the funding to get things done that need to be done. And I'm going to leave this with you. A classmate of mine put this together over the summer for her internship, and so I borrowed it from her, and it's a really pretty exhaustive listing of different sources here, and I hope that there are some that would be helpful and that you could go ahead and use. I am excited for you, though, because I think you have a wonderful opportunity with the community hall. It is in very sound condition, even for having been pretty much deserted for the past 20 years. It's in really good structural shape. And I know that you have a collection that you'd like to go ahead and show, and some different things that you'd like to see going on there. And it's a part, I hope you can see that it's a part of Catatonk that is really important and that has a lot of neat history, and I think that should be continued and maintained through the years. So I think you have a really neat opportunity in front of you. And I'd like to leave you with an idea that comes from one of the Technical Preservation Services briefs that I think really encapsulates very well why you should preserve anything anyway. Who cares? Why preserve it? Why not just knock it down and turn it into a bigger parking lot for the feed mill across the road? Well, I have an idea about that. But the Technical Preservation Services brief, I think this really puts it very, very well. It says, and I quote, "Structures are historic because the materials and craftsmanship reflected in their construction are tangible and irreplaceable evidence of our cultural heritage." So the idea, you can reach out and touch a building like the Catatonk Community Hall. That's history that you can actually feel and you can interact with, and I think that's the important reason to keep it and to preserve it. So I'd like to thank you very much thank everyone who was incredibly helpful while I was going through this research process. Several people, the Dohertys were very kind with their time. Carol Henry was also very kind. Mr. Westgate was very kind to call in that crawl space with me. And I interviewed several people, none of whom I see here, but their names are mentioned in the report as well, so I'd like to thank everybody who was helpful. And I would like to field any questions, any other questions. You had several really good ones. Any more that I can attempt to answer?
Size of the parking lot.
It's
How
very
does
small.
that restrict us? Legally and other ways?
I don't see that it necessarily is going to legally restrict you in any way. It may restrict the size of activities that you want to hold there because it is so small. You can definitely park along the road, but as you know, people are going pretty fast through there, and it's
Bad
not.
place.
Yeah. And actually, that interestingly enough, and I never took the time, this is again something somebody could do if they wanted to. I never took the time, but there are actually 2 deeds for the property that now makes up the community hall property. And I think the second section that was purchased from Mr. Toft was for the parking lot.
Yeah,
I
well,
think the first one was for the building, and then the second one was for the parking lot, and it's still very small.
they paid for the parking lot.
Yes, not a huge amount of money, I don't remember exactly.
500.
It's something like that, it wasn't very much, wasn't very much. But yeah, and the parking situation is, is something.
And there's no place to go. Our neighbor's garden.
Yeah, Mr. Sinato's garden. He doesn't want a garden anymore, maybe he could buy that.
Oh, that's possible, it's possible.
Did you find when Catatonk officially became Catatonk? Because on the
No,
1855 map, it is called South Candor.
I
And
found,
1869 it's called Catatonk.
yeah, I found the 1869, I don't remember seeing the 1859, I remember something with the South Candor, I may not have copied it though. But no, I did, there's just a real lack of information about where Catatonk, and so it's real hard. You kind of have to piece stuff together from gazetteers and other big information that happens to mention it. But I'd be interested to know when it actually,
Probably had something to do with the post office, starting the post
Yeah.
office.
Yeah, and that probably was tied to the railroad and how much was going out and being used from the community. I know that milk was a big, that there was a milk train that went through, used to pick up the students to go to school in Vigo and other dairy products.
Catatonk had a creamery.
Yeah, and the creamery that was there and through actually 1940s, I think. So, yeah, I'd be interested to know that, but I just didn't find that information.
There's no real official organization or anything. It's just sort of clustered around the mill.
Right, right. Right, it's never been incorporated in any way, shape, or form. It's just been a little spot in the road that has a green sign that says yes.
Yeah, 45 now.
And you
Yeah,
better
you
slow
have
down.
to slow down to 45, right.
I have
Especially with the highway department there.
You would think maybe if the post office was located in the old Kroger store there, that if you went back to the postal system, you might be able to find out something there.
That's very possible.
Isn't there a nice house there?
I'm sure you could find out when it was started
Yeah.
and who the postmasters were, and I'm sure that would be very interesting to trace back. Yeah, well, that'd be fascinating.
I have a story which probably Mr. Hollenbeck didn't know about.
I got a lot of
A fellow by the name of Fred Frank worked in the oil pumping station. And he was sort of a practical joker, type. He found a Halloween mask in the corner of the pumping station there, and he got the idea that he would make a head out of mortar and whatever, and bury it in Fred Kyle's gravel pit. And so he did. And he eventually Mr. Kyle found it. Aha! The Cardiff Giant here. Anyway, I think he called people in Cornell and they came down. I don't know if there's a record of that in Cornell.
That's terrible. Oh, no. They must have thought it was the next big
Which would
discovery.
be 1920?
I have no idea. Uncle Dwight used to tell the story, so I'm not sure.
You ought to get Nancy Weber's brother and
Yep.
my brother and three more to tell you about Catatonk.
Yeah.
One Halloween, the frolic store was still in operation, they took, I think it was a manure spreader,
Took the manure spreader.
with
yeah,
the store manure spreader apart, and reassembled it on Corlick's
and broke.
roof.
There's bad kids in here.
Oh.
That's only where I can go.
Geez, they put you in jail now for it.
Yeah, right.
And look funny at you.
It was just good, clean fun.
Yeah.
Well, that's the type of thing that would be really valuable to have somebody to go around and collect all of those different stories about Catatonk and put them down and
If we
so people could start to.
do our Catatonk days, we started doing the reunion with Catatonk days, all the
Great.
people that lived in Catatonk. But we haven't had one in a while. My father was the president of the community club,
Oh, I see.
and we lived across the street. So I remember those dances, and I remember LaCroix and this.
Roundup boys?
Yes.
Oh, were they good?
Yes, they were good, and my father used to play the fiddle in the band.
I almost think my brother's band played there one time back in the
Yeah,
50s.
probably.
They
I mean, I
had a
can remember
band,
I was
too.
little, but I
Ernie
can
and his
remember going
Bobos.
over there.
Oh, really? Well, the community club actually had a band at one point. Mr. Hollenbeck was in it. He talked about
Yeah,
what
my
he had
dad,
done
my
in it
dad was
and.
the leader of the.
Okay, there you go, there you go. So, yeah, it was, it was a neat place, had a
It
lot of
was.
stuff that was going on
Mhm.
through.
I showed slides there one time.
Did you?
Yeah,
We used to have-
club.
Yeah, I actually have a picture in here of them having a hunter safety class
Mhm.
there, so, yeah, I mean, it just had everything, just about everything you can imagine took place at the community hall at one point.
The Halloween parties there.
1959, my folks, my mom and dad, Claude and Glenn Newman, had their 40th wedding anniversary there. And I have got pictures. If you'd
I have
like.
You do?
I
Oh,
have
it's
pictures
what
of
I
inside there.
tried to find pictures
Of
of
the
Billy.
inside of that?
Yeah,
I
I
have
just
pictures
couldn't
of
find
the
it.
inside.
Really
I mean,
beautiful.
Well, there's a large family of us, and we've got a whole big group of us, and mom and dad cutting the cake, and if I can look in.
Oh, that'd be wonderful. I'd really enjoy seeing them because
That
I
was
just,
1959.
it would show the heating system. My professor went out with me.
Well, that changed the front part of that,
It was
just
January,
with the
so we
kitchen
probably
that they
needed
put
that
in
heating
there.
system.
So the kitchen actually was there from the beginning.
Right,
Yes.
but they changed the kitchen around too.
Yes,
because
they did.
Put that other heating system in,
Yeah.
because I can remember,
The kitchen used to be the whole back side, and
Yep.
they had to divide it.
and I remember as kids used to go up the back stairs in the front of the building, go up the back stairs there up to the loft.
Mhm.
And we used to sit up there and watch all the dances on
Mhm.
Saturday night, because we weren't allowed downstairs.
Downstairs. My professor came out at one point with me, and we were walking around. He just loved the building. I mean, he could not praise it enough. He said, "Oh, if this were just in Ithaca, I'd buy it in a second." I mean, he just loved it. But what interested him the most, he's an interesting guy. What interested him the most was the ductwork that is along. He could not figure out how the ductwork connected to whatever furnace it connected to at whatever point in time. In fact, he brought it up in a class later on. He said, "Who was I with that I couldn't figure out where the duct were?" And it puzzled him to no end. So I would love to see a picture of the furnace to see if it
I
did
don't know
connect to
whether
this
it-
one.
It showed any, but I know we got family groups.
Oh, that's neat.
down there. Yeah, that's fun for dancing, we went to a lot of dances there. That's all you could afford to do.
Well, it sounds like they just were, very, very well attended, hundreds of
Yes,
people.
Mhm.
Yeah. That may have been why they had to replace the floor joists earlier, too. I don't know, because the old ones are actually still in there, half rotted away.
Well, these old dancing floors were required to be springy.
Yeah?
Springier the better.
Put the spring in your step, didn't they?
Well, good, well, thank you. If anybody else has any questions, it's maybe in the report, maybe, I don't know. So thank you again, very much.